with the recording equipment, and we'll make our way through the agenda. First item then is apologies. Any apologies?
Sean Lynch.
Sean Lynch, okay. Any other apologies? Patsy Scorer? Okay. No problem. Agenda item 2 then, draft minutes of the meeting on the 26th and 28th of May. Can I just advise you the draft minutes of the meeting on the 26th of May are pages 5 and 6 of the meeting folder, and the draft minutes of the meeting on the 28th of May can be found in the table papers, page 3 through to 9. So if you're happy enough with the minutes, let me know and I'll sign them off. Are you happy enough?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Okay, agenda item 3 then, matters arising. The first item is just in reference to the Justice Bill. Myself and the Deputy Chair have just met with the Minister around the committee's decision to oppose Clause 86 and whether there's something that we will be agreeable to in terms of giving them some flexibility that they feel is essential, given the fact that there can be a number of amendments put in that aren't particularly anticipated on a wide range of issues given the scope of the Justice Bills. So we've suggested that they may want to come to us with any sort of proposals, and then the committee can make a decision on whether we're confident enough to support it. The other issue that I made reference to in that meeting was the Assembly took a decision to retain the facility for preliminary investigations, but a number of members, even those who voted to keep them, have supported the Jim Allister amendments, did mention that they wanted to ensure that there was some protection there for vulnerable witnesses and victims of crime. So again, that's something which the Minister is going to look at, and whether or not he will bring something forward at further consideration stage to try to tighten that up. But I think it's proving to be quite difficult to do, but just to make members aware that that's what we're going to do. And then finally, a few of the amendments that came through from Paul Frew and from Dolores Kelly involving Sarah's Law and Clare's Law. I made note during the committee, during the debate, that I'll be keen to be kept involved in that from a committee point of view. So if members are agreeable, then we will ask the department to come and give us some up-to-date information on those. I think they are quite detailed issues, and we want to make sure we get them right. Item 2 then is just in relation to the PPS. They indicated previously that we would have had the report around the handling of the Adams case at the latest on Tuesday. That hasn't happened, and they're now saying it's going to be next Tuesday before they get it. I'm not particularly satisfied with that. I think if they tell us they're going to give us something at the latest on Tuesday and it doesn't happen, they need to give us a reason why. Members will also, I'm sure, be aware of the media coverage of a recent trial that fell through yesterday, in which some of the witnesses have said that they had little faith in the PPS. I don't think it's been a particularly good 2 weeks for them, but we do just have the opportunity, just to remind members, we do have the opportunity to question the Director of Public Prosecutions next week when he's in front of the committee. And it's something that we may wish to raise. Agenda item 4 then.
Chairman, just on that, I think it's hugely unfortunate that we're not receiving the report until next Tuesday, when the public prosecutors actually come in before us. And to some extent that could potentially impair our ability to, and certainly puts us under a lot more pressure to adequately prepare for what is a very important hearing. And I think it should be indicated that we should be receiving this before Tuesday. We should be receiving it before the weekend, to be honest.
We'll go back to them and see if it comes before then.
Yeah.
But I suspect that we will probably not get it in advance of Tuesday.
Chair, just a small matter, just in relation to the minute of the 26th of May. I was unable to attend. I sent my apologies, but they're not recorded.
Okay, sure we will. Okay, members happy enough to amend that?
Thank you very much, Chair.
Which try to be helpful. So, agenda item 4 then is the Assistance Strategy and Action Plan. Members will recall that we considered a written paper on the department's draft Assistance Strategy and Action Plan at the meeting back on the 16th of April, and then we agreed to schedule an oral briefing in the matter, I think at the request of Chris at the time. Officials will attend today. Relevant papers at pages 9 through 38 of your folders. So if I can ask, to come forward to the desk. Just as everybody takes their seats, can I welcome Sue McAllister, Director of Reducing Offending and Director General of the Prison Service, Brian McGaughey, Director of Rehabilitation, Prison Service, Declan McKeown, Chief Executive, Youth Justice Agency, and Cheryl Lamont, Acting Director of the Probation Board, to the meeting. And whenever you're ready in your own time, you can brief members, and then we'll open up the questions afterwards. So.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We welcome the opportunity to brief the committee today. Members had requested a briefing on the Department's strategic approach to desistance and our supporting action plan. Perhaps it would be helpful if I discussed how we developed our approach and then hand over to Brian to provide an overview of the key factors that can influence an individual to desist from offending and the key areas we seek to address in the action plan. Of course, we'll then be happy to discuss any questions that you may have on wider issues relating to reducing offending. On the strategic context, our work on desistance is a key strand of our prison reform programme, as well as a departmental commitment in the current programme for government. Our work on desistance builds on the foundation laid by the strategic framework for reducing offending, which sets out how the executive can build a safer Northern Ireland through a long-term reduction in offending behaviour, with core objectives being to prevent people from becoming involved in offending behaviour and to reduce reoffending among those who do so. The development of the desistance strategy benefited from strong engagement with statutory partners and with our colleagues in the third sector. This was supported by a resettlement study by Shad Maruna at Queen's University and an examination of some of the factors which influenced the decision to recall a person to prison custody. We also held a successful engagement event last year, and it was clear from the attendance and contributions at the event that there was broad buy-in to desistance principles and a strong commitment to work together to improve the outcomes for individuals in the criminal justice system. The new Reducing Offending Directorate allows us to work in a more integrated and collaborative way. The presence here today of the heads of the Youth Justice Agency and of the Probation Board is evidence of that collaborative approach. It might be helpful if I outline what we mean when we talk about desistance. Desistance theory is an area of criminological research concerned with the reasons that a person decides to stop offending. It recognises the capacity of individuals to change and provides some insight into the factors that can support that change. Understanding how and why people move away from criminality provides us with opportunity to develop new thinking and more creative and innovative approaches to rehabilitation. The desistance strategy sets out a shared understanding of desistance and the role it can play in our criminal justice system. It introduces the key principles of desistance we will use as we work to improve outcomes for people in contact with the justice system and to reduce risk of further reoffending. Through the strategy, we are introducing a focused programme of work to embed desistance theory in our policy and our practice. We recognise that making a break from crime can be an extremely difficult process. That said, it is a process that we can support by creating an environment that focuses on developing the individual and equipping them with practical skills and experience to live lives free from further offending and make a positive contribution to their families and wider society. The challenge for colleagues working across our criminal justice system is to ensure that we recognise the opportunities to encourage change and provide appropriate guidance and support. Unless they are given the tools to enable them to turn their lives around and the encouragement to desist from crime, offenders will continue to cycle in and out of the criminal justice system, causing significant damage not only to themselves, but to their victims and the communities in which they live. Through supporting change and promoting desistance, we will reduce the risk of reoffending and secure better outcomes for people in contact with the criminal justice system, their families and the wider community. I'll now hand over to Brian to speak in more detail.
Thank you, Chair. During the consultation on the strategic framework, people wanted to know what we meant by desistance, what factors could contribute to desistance, and what could we do to demonstrate our commitment to supporting change and promoting desistance from crime. As Sue has outlined, the strategy document describes what we mean by desistance, and highlights the factors that can contribute to a reduction in offending. Key factors, many of which you will know, that can influence an individual to desist are getting older and maturing, families and relationships, sobriety, employment, hope and motivation, having something to give others, having a place in the social group, not having a criminal identity, being believed in. The action plan seeks to use this knowledge to deliver a desistance-based approach that puts the individual at the heart of the rehabilitative process, promotes a coherent, joined-up approach across our justice system. The action plan we are seeking addresses 4 key areas: improving our evidence base, developing the capacity of our staff, delivering targeted joined-up support, and engaging and communicating with our stakeholders. Taking a desistance-based approach is very much about working with the individual, not onto them, to reduce the likelihood of reoffending and to prevent further risk to the public. We firmly believe that the Desistance Action Plan is a solid platform, a platform from which we can work to address the root causes of offending behaviour, challenge individuals to change that behaviour, and support them to live lives free from further offending. There is, as you will have seen, quite a lot of detail in the action plan relating to how we will better align our work to support desistance from crime, and colleagues from probation and from the Youth Justice Agency will be able to provide some practical examples of ongoing work. We would therefore be happy to take any questions from members.
Okay. Thank you very much. Just in terms of that action plan, there didn't seem to be any specifics in terms of how you anticipate measuring outcomes. There doesn't seem any specific targets or anything. Is that something that, do you have any specific targets in terms of how you can say whether or not it's been a success or a failure?
Well, the assistance strategy is driven by the strategic framework for reducing offending. And within that strategic document, there are 2 key outcomes related to measuring new entrants into the criminal justice system and measuring the 1-year reoffending rates. So the assistance strategy would ultimately contribute to those 2 key outcomes.
Okay. You'd mentioned about how important one of the key determinants in reducing reoffending was employment. I personally would be quite keen on sort of employment programs and work programs as an alternative, maybe for lower level offenders, an alternative to going into prison, that they're put into work programs, or even in terms of those who may be given early release for good behaviour or anything else, rather than just being released into the community. They serve out their full sentence, but perhaps in a different way towards the end of their sentence in a work programme. Is that something that you would concur with? And if there's any need then for work with other departments, is other departments being consulted on that?
Well, before I hand over to colleagues, I know that in terms of the early release scheme, which is about to start, there has been some interest from the committee about whether we could require people to undertake work, and at the moment our scheme doesn't allow us to do that, but we certainly have flagged that you are interested in that, so we are talking about who we need to talk to. There would need to be some legislative change, but also it would require us to work across departments. In terms of employment, it is without doubt one of the things we have been working hardest on, and we have a number of creative initiatives now across the Reducing Offending Directorate, so in prisons, in the community, for all age groups, focusing on getting people into jobs. So rather than talk about employability, which we did in the past and which I worried was slightly nebulous, we now talk about employment and getting people into jobs. And as recently as yesterday, we saw the opening of the Thinking Cup bookstore, which was one of the early interventions projects. We've got a number of initiatives now where we've got people working in real jobs on a daily basis, people who go back to custody in the evening, and people who are on community-based disposals. So we're very, very keen, as I know you are, to look at how we support people into employment, and importantly support employers who want to offer opportunities to offenders but are sometimes nervous because of the media, because of some of the negative reaction, and also of course because of the implications for other people who are seeking employment in other parts of the community. Do you want to add anything?
employment is undoubtedly a major factor in supporting desistance from crime, not only in the constructive occupation of time and payment for work done, but in terms of enhancing self-worth, self-esteem, ridding somebody of the criminal identity and engaging with others who are not from a criminal background, giving people a sense of hope, motivation, giving something to give back to the community. And I absolutely agree that anything we do in terms of employment or engaging offenders and work where it gives them an opportunity to pay back is a positive thing and supports desistance.
Yeah, perhaps, Chair, I may add from a young person's perspective, I mean, we see desistance as a cornerstone of what we do, and certainly if you look, for instance, in the context of the Juvenile Justice Centre, our emphasis is on equipping the young person with the necessary skills to go back out into the community. That includes 20 hours educational, vocational training each week, and life skills support, and working closely with their family to develop plans, etc. So we certainly see that, and in the wider youth justice services, we make sure that they make links, be it on a voluntary basis or much more proactively with the various groupings out there to learn the skills to bring them back into their community.
And specifically with younger people, I mean, it's the same, I suppose, irrespective of what area you're looking at. The whole idea of mentoring is very important. Is mentoring something which you consider as, I'm presuming you consider it as very valuable, but is it something that should be mandatory, or if it's made mandatory, just take away the value of it? So the idea of mentoring, I know there's organisations who offer mentoring to young offenders. Should it be kept as a voluntary principle, or is there something there that it could be made mandatory as part of a rehabilitation?
I'll pass to Cheryl in a second, Chair, but to say from my own perspective, I think mentoring is key to this, and certainly that's what we try to do. And certainly some people who've been through the system with us come back as mentors for the younger people. In fact, we had an event last night where one of the recipients of a certificate actually had been through a car crime incident herself. She's now a leader and a volunteer working with the young people. So I think it does work, but I'll pass to Cheryl.
Chair, if I can inform the committee of a new innovative scheme called Reset, and it's actually probation were successful in availing of funding through the Executive Change Fund, which was funded for a period of a year, and really it focuses on innovation. And I think, to be fair, pardon me, we've taken our lead from Youth Justice colleagues, how they've really benefited from and realised the benefits from mentoring. We haven't often done that with adults in probation who we supervise, but we are now actually entering a programme called Reset. It's focusing on those aged 18 to 30-year-old males, essentially higher risk individuals, and we will be having a mentor with them a month before they come out of prison. And they're going to be followed with a mentor for a period of 12 weeks. What we do know from research and recall and reoffending is that for those individuals, or some individuals who come out, the critical period will be that period of transition into the community, particularly around, to be honest with you, anything from week 4 up to probably week 11, week 12. And we want to actually ensure that mentoring, and particularly as going back to employment, as well as accommodation, lifestyle issues and everything else, is very much that they can access now universal services. We are going to be delivering that programme with our voluntary community sector partners. It's actually been NIACRO who've been supplying that service for a period of a year. And it's very important now, particularly through the Reoffending Directorate, we want to make sure that we evidence what we do actually works. So we're going to be evaluating it, and we'll be able to come back hopefully to the committee in a year's time and say yes, this worked, or no, it didn't, and the reasons why it did.
And is that a compulsory thing then? So you work with them just before they get released. Once they're released, then you're saying it's a period of weeks. Is that something which is compulsory for? Well,
we're certainly into our probation in terms of our supervision pact with them that they're agreeing to that they actually have to do. And in terms of, I think they're going to be motivated to do that, because within all of desistance, if I can say, it's like taking the horse to water. There has to be a level of motivation with that individual to actually change facets of their lifestyle, and that's what we want to actually make sure that within a controlled setting that they can be encouraged to do that in a more intensive way than certainly we've done before.
Okay. And just finally, before I open up to other members, is there a budget set aside to sit alongside the strategy, or where's is there a cost associated with it?
Well, in terms of the various work strands, they are individually costed and funded, but there's no ring-fenced budget for it, so it is obviously subject to the same financial challenges the rest of our budget. Brian, do you want to add
I
anything?
think, Chair, I think the important thing in relation to this strategy is about aligning and collaborating and supporting one another in the delivery of proven interventions to reduce crime.
All right, Chris?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for the presentation. The Chair's actually asked a few of the questions I was going to say. In and around, I suppose, has this been shaped by like international best practice when it comes to the assistance theory? And to what extent? And what challenges elsewhere are we likely to face here then as well?
In terms of what's shaped our approach to desistance, yes, it has, because we've obviously collaborated with academics who have in turn identified good practice at an international level. So what we know from other jurisdictions as well as from our own. Sorry, Kristen, what was the second bit of your question?
What challenges then have pertained in other areas that we need to be alert to locally ourselves?
Well, I mean, certainly some of the big issues, and Brian mentioned, are around sobriety and addiction, around accommodation and employment, but also linking to what Cheryl was saying, it's about role models and having supporters and influencers who are not of a criminal nature. Brian, did you want to say something?
Chris, we have based this strategy on a wide range of evidence and research published in relation to the assistance theory from people like Fergus McNeill, Professor of Criminology and Social Work, University of Glasgow, Shad Marino, formerly of Queen's University, Claire Lightower from the Director of Centre of Youth and Criminal Justice in Strathclyde, and also Stephen Farrell from the Centre of Criminal Research in Sheffield, who have researched this widely. But research in relation to assistance, although it would have been called something different, goes back as far as 1993. In terms of the challenges, I think we reflect the challenges in our action plan and how we shaped our action plan and the 4 areas that we look at in terms of improving our own evidence base right across the criminal justice system in Northern Ireland, so that we all have the same evidence base and are often responding offenders on the basis of that evidence, to have that consistency, developing the capacity of our staff, and I would admit that not all organisations were at the same starting point. I think those organisations who had a social work base may have been further advanced in terms of knowledge and understanding of the principles of assistance and engagement with offenders. Delivering targeted and joined-up support rather than individual interventions. How can we do this as a collective, as a criminal justice system in Northern Ireland, a Justice and Offending Directorate? And I think we have a task, we have a challenge in terms of engaging with our communities and with the media and others to help them understand our approach.
Just finally then, about the interface, I suppose, between the Department for Employment and Learning and even Education to a certain extent. Is that ongoing at the minute, or how is that developed?
It's very good. I met yesterday with my opposite number in the Department of Employment and Learning, and certainly the event I mentioned yesterday, which was the Early Interventions Transformation Project, was jointly attended by ministers from Justice and Employment and Learning, as well as other representatives. So there is a very close tie-in. You'll know that we opened Hyde Bank College as a college, and again both departments were heavily involved and continue to be involved, and both ministers were supportive of that. So we know that employment is closely linked to literacy and numeracy, so our learning and skills agenda is informed by what makes people able to access jobs. But we do have a very close working relationships with the Department for Employment and Learning, and in the case of Youth Justice, the Department for Education, because those young people come under a different set of standards for education.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, Raymond?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. I think it's the first time Cheryl's been here since the bomb attack in Derry, so we just to sort of obviously express solidarity with your staff and
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
In relation to, I think we talked about challenges. In terms, and this goes across both custodial and non-custodial offenders. Are there obviously different challenges? You know, you can see where this would be easier to implement for non-custodial offenders. What's the particular challenges in terms of custody?
Well, before I went to college, we've always been clear that the citizens that are in our custody are the same citizens that are looked after in the community. It's just that they're serving a period during which their active citizenship in the community is suspended. So many of the challenges are the same. Obviously, some people's access to some of the things we can offer is constrained by virtue of their security requirements or their risk. But largely, it would be the same approach, which is why the Reducing Offending Directorate gives us the opportunity to use our resources more flexibly across both community and custody, so that we don't have siloed working, we have a more collaborative approach. Cheryl, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, Ash, I would agree in the sense of, you know, in the community, it's really the person, whenever they're out of prison, is very much engaged in everyday work in terms of resettlement and everything else. I suppose it's different challenges at different points, because I've already said at the beginning, in terms of that transition period, you know, the challenges they have to face come thick and fast, from moving out of custodial settling into the community. And very often family and significant others play a very important part in that. However, we know from probation that there are those offenders, because of their own offences, that they may not be able to return back to their home environment or indeed their own family, if it was sexual offences or whatever, and they have to then, you know, there's challenges in that, and then relocating, finding appropriate accommodation where they can be safely managed in the community. And again, with age, with desistance, we know that it's often said the older you get, the wiser you're supposed to become. But actually that's true to some extent, because we know that, and Brian has alluded to it, that as you get older, in terms of the level of reoffending actually reduces. And that's why I've said about the innovative scheme that we're delivering on the Reset programme. We're really targeting the hard to get at group in terms of those 18 to 30-year-olds who really we want to try and change, because they're probably ones which they're at that age group, maybe patterns of reoffending which are more hardened than other age groups.
Thank you.
But, I mean, obviously, I mean, the progress, and sorry, my apologies.
I think both Brian and Declan wanted to say something, Redmond, before we move.
Well, I'll just be very brief, sorry. I mean, as you know from Minister's announcement a couple of weeks ago, I mean, we kind of recognise with young people there's a spectrum, and you try to get there earlier with them as possible rather than let them go into the justice system. We also recognise at the further end, once children are into the system, and particularly in the Woodlands scenario, some may feel that they're more on that stigmatised path, and it's harder to take them out of, and that's the challenge that Cheryl alluded to, people wanting to change. So it will take more intense work to work with them at the far side in the Woodlands, and that's why we try to get them earlier and upstream and work with them, and that's the point of the early intervention programme.
I think, Rimla, I would say, as a Reducing Offending Directorate, we need to be aware that we need to step out of our silos and engage with people as a collective. They are individual citizens first, offenders second, and prisoners third, but they go back around the system and back out into the community. And it is our job to engage people, and you talked about the challenges, and we need to get prisons to engage people, understanding that everybody has the capacity to change, and the onus is on us to support them, to effect that change and provide the opportunities to allow them to change, so that when they go back out to the community, they're less risky, less likely to reoffend. Each of the organisations are at different stages in their development and embracing of assistance, and in prisons we have introduced it and introduced training, awareness raising to the new prisoner development units, and that has been enthusiastically embraced. I now need to get that out and onto the landings to the other staff, so that's the challenge.
And that sort of leads me on to my second question, because there's obviously a group of, say, Highbank, in terms of the advance made there, like it's easy to see how this can work very effectively in that sense. When you take McGabry or McGilligan, will there be accommodation blocks which will allow you to target individuals who maybe first-time offenders, minor offence, the right strategy put in place, then you have a better chance of the outcome? So will there be accommodation changes to facilitate that?
Well, certainly I think we'd be talking about McGabry in relation to that sort of thing. We've had, as you know, over the last 12 months, we've seen the population pressures ease somewhat, but it is still a challenge at the moment in McGabry to run a decent regime for the prisoners that we've got. So we're not in the business yet of identifying particular accommodation and doing it on a residential basis. We think we retain the flexibility to accommodate prisoners in the way that we do, and actually look at regime opportunities. So prisoners could come from any part of the accommodation blocks to access those regime facilities.
And in terms of, I mean, I think one of the factors, one of them was the sort of idea of the criminal identity, I think, Brian.
Not having a criminal identity. Yeah.
I'm just wondering in terms of, in recent times there's been some advance of the rehabilitation of offenders, the restrictions in England and Wales. I'm just wondering what benefit they would be in that type of assistance in the future in terms of identity, re-examination of the rehabilitation of offenders.
Do you mean in terms of disclosing?
Just when it becomes off the record, so to speak, say take the 18-year-olds.
And I know, and Declan might want to talk about this, and I know that there has been a push here as well as in other jurisdictions to remove things from people's records, and I think that's absolutely the right thing to pursue. However, it ought not to be the only way to support people into employment, and one of the things that we've been doing is working with employers who are willing to employ offenders and ex-offenders in the full knowledge that they have got a criminal past. So, for example, we insist when we support people into jobs that there is full disclosure, so that employers are going into this with their eyes open, and that's been very successful. And actually, that's about acknowledging the past but moving on.
Yeah, just to add that, I mean, Minister Ford has taken forward a more balanced approach now, and where he's looking at a filtering arrangement, and certainly for young people, it's about at the earliest possible time filtering their records to make sure that anything that is of a less serious nature can be removed from their record.
I mean, working with some, particularly younger people, a lot of them sometimes themselves feel that there's no point in applying for some jobs because of a record. Now, even though employers would have a good enough approach to it, but it's trying to get but if there's a way of, particularly for young people, of first of all reassuring them they can apply, but secondly, from this side of it, trying to remove it off the record.
And I think you're absolutely right, Raymond, and as you know, that's being reviewed next year. But everything we have learned in the last 2 years, 3 years, as we've been moving to work more closely with employers, tells us that actually there are a good number of people who are willing to give people a second chance, and that ought to be what we try to promote as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, sure.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation and a genuine appreciation for the work that you're trying to do. In terms of the desistance theory and the way in which it works, and you've got a chart in the report which sets out the factors which support desistance, and there are things which we would all recognise in terms of the communities that we live in. It's having a place in a social group, it's families and relationships, it's sobriety, it's employment, it's not having that criminal identity. And because all of those factors are factors that already exist in building good communities, what is the relationship between you and the criminal justice system and those who are not in the criminal justice system but are delivering that on a daily basis in schools, youth clubs, and other organisations for older people? For example, you may have sobriety issues but never be a criminal, or whatever. So I just want to understand what the link is between you and that, and is there a good knowledge interchange between you and, in the criminal justice system, delivering desistance activities, and the rest of society which does that as well?
Okay. Declan?
Well, I mean, certainly from a young person's perspective, we have very good relationships, links to sports clubs, schools, etc., etc. And that's one of the reasons why we feel this early intervention programme that we mentioned in our previous session was a good idea, because we believe there are people out there who can identify the signals, such as a child missing school a lot, etc., etc., and they will filter that through. And certainly my experience of working around the various offices across Northern Ireland has been that where a child's come to the attention, that's been factored through to us, or where we have noted it, we have been able to communicate that to someone else. So that works well, certainly for the younger people.
And is that also, sorry, Chair, is that also, if you like, rolled out to PSNI initiatives as well, that they use in young people interventions as well?
We have a very close working relationship with PSNI, and certainly through ROP and Reduced Offending Partnership, etc. We have those links. So yeah, short answer.
We can sorry, Stuart, we can share with you this chat, which we don't think you've got, which is it shows you some of the external organisations that we work with, to show that actually there is a link between the criminal justice system and other systems. So we'll let you have a copy of that, which might be helpful.
That's That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay, Sammy?
Thank you very much for your presentation so far. Frank, can maybe ask you in terms of the strategy, have you built into it the savings that would undoubtedly be made as a result of this to the public purse? And the numbers, I think maybe Ray mentioned about the targets in terms of the number of people who stop reoffending. Because the reason why I'm saying it, obviously, is always a big key to success in terms of drawing down funding from various government departments. If they can show that it's successful, it's actually saving the taxpayer money.
I think Cheryl has provided an excellent example at a time of austerity and financial cuts, how we can creatively make application to draw down new monies. In terms of us joining together to deliver a more joined-up approach from the backdrop of knowledge of what factors promote desistance and what the key principles are, that in time will, I believe, allow us to reduce rates of reoffending. In terms of finances at the present time, so I would have to say we're at the point of understanding how we can do this without calculating the actual savings that we're going to make, and that would be an honest response.
I think that's absolutely right. And the other thing to say, because we are a small criminal justice system with a small prison service and a small probation service and a small youth justice agency, it takes longer to get cashable savings out when you reduce reoffending. So, for example, if you reduce the size of the prison population, that wouldn't deliver cashable savings unless you reduced it to the point where you could close a prison or part of a prison. What we are doing is driving down the cost, as you know, of keeping people in custody and looking after people in the community. So we're driving that down through other ways. But in terms of any dividend on reducing reoffending, that takes much longer to cash in.
And maybe, I think Brian made a point about probation board in Northern Ireland. I was an organisation the last couple of months, and they were availing of a scheme by the probation board in Northern Ireland, Newton Orange Older, your office, Newton Orange Older, Cheryl, and they were very appreciative, and it was hugely successful, linking with the organisation, no unmanaged organisation name, but also local community people as well. It was a great, smashing scheme. I thought to myself, would it be good if the money or someone could help to roll that out, in other areas? And maybe that's a question for Cheryl then. In terms of those, you probably know the scheme I'm talking about, through the football and stuff. Anyway.
Oh yes.
And so Cheryl, are we at a capacity with that, or could we do more of that if the resources were available?
I think the honest answer is we'd always want to do the right things, in terms of reducing reoffending. And I think we can always look at different ways to make sure we can maximise capacity. Certainly, the schemes that we're talking about here, whatever they are, that's proven to be effective. And I think part of that effectiveness measure for me, certainly from probation perspective, and I think probably across the whole directorate, has to be the value that others, particularly in the community, see that, because the people we work with, myself in the community and those within, if they're prisoners or whatever, those individuals will come out into community, and if the community can recognise and accept them as part of being reintegrated within that community, because everybody lives within a community somewhere in Northern Ireland, and I think it's imperative that we make sure that they're connected to all the spokes in that map that Sue held up there in terms of everything, all those services. So, Sammy, I want to assure you that certainly probation will continue to deliver to a maximum point of what we can do.
I think that's absolutely right, and it's also worth saying, Sammy, that we are being credited now with being more entrepreneurial than ever we've been. We're have typically been constrained by what we can do with public sector funding, but increasingly we're looking with our voluntary and community sector partners to co-design services, but also now we are talking to Social Enterprise NI about how we can fund or support social enterprise model type of approach to initiatives, so that we can draw down other sources of funding, for example, lottery funding, heritage funding, charitable funding. So we are open to any ideas as to how we can do things more creatively, because it has been it's been quite a challenge for us to think creatively when we've been used to being constrained by our traditional way of thinking, but we've got some fantastic examples now of doing just that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, Alban.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I welcome you all here, and I think this is a good approach, and I wish you well. The two things that struck me were, one, the scheme rolling out of the Family Matters style scheme programmes within the pre-prison establishments. And the other aspect that interested me was to further develop the use of restorative practice for adults in the criminal justice system. We do have a very good restorative justice approach in terms of youth conferencing. It's, I think, a model for best practice internationally. Just in relation to dealing with adults, have there been any advances in respect of that?
Yeah. Yes, there has. And you may know that we have a senior officer from Maghaberry who's been seconded to work with Northern Ireland Alternatives and CRJI for the last 12 months, precisely to look at how we can harvest some of the good practice from the Youth Justice Agency. You'll also know that Northern Ireland is streets ahead of many other jurisdictions in the way it uses restorative approaches to within the criminal justice system. So we're now, we started with Hyde Bank, but have also now done some training in all 3 prisons in relation to how we can deliver restorative solutions, both in internal, so how we deal with prison discipline and in an internal way, but also on the reducing offending and the more strategic agenda. Brian, do you want to?
Yeah, please, if I may. I am leading on the development of an adult restorative justice strategy for criminal justice in Northern Ireland. I've already commenced my engagement both with the PSNI, Youth Justice Agency, PBNI and the community-based schemes to devise a strategy which will allow everybody to accommodate their business areas. I think that's important. It's something that we haven't had in Northern Ireland, and I seek to build on the enormous success of the Youth Justice Agency in that regard, because I believe personally and professionally that when somebody has committed a crime, that we should afford them the opportunity to make amends for what they've done, to repair the damage they've done, and put the victim more central in our criminal justice system. In relation, Alban, to the Family Matters landing, and interestingly, the committee have touched on all 3 of our priorities. This year, the Reducing Offending Director have prioritised families, mentors and employment. That's where we seek to direct the limited and reducing funds that we have. It would be my vision, my aspiration, that the Family Matters landing would have a presence in all 3 of our establishments. I read recently in a report from England and Wales that families were the most successful change agent in terms of reducing offending, and that's something we must grasp and put at the centre of our strategy.
Some good work in relation to that in England. I mean, I've heard about it. I haven't actually visited any of the schemes, but I have read about it. And I think it's very effective in terms of restoring the linkage between the prisoner and his family, particularly the children.
We absolutely, and just to tell you about a couple of things. First of all, we've commissioned some research. We've got a researcher from Birmingham University who's going to be coming and actually sitting in our headquarters for 3 months in the summer, doing some work on the links between family ties and visits and reducing offending. And if I just give you one example of where we're being more creative about how we support young people to maintain family links, you may know that we've got a pop-up restaurant in Hyde Bank Wood this 2 weeks. It's just coming to the end of the 2 weeks, and we plan to keep it going. And last Saturday, the young men, the 10 or 11 young men, I think it is, who've been working in there, getting real skills which will make them more employable, actually were able to have their visits in that restaurant. So the families came in last Saturday and sat down with the young men and ate a meal, a snack and soup that the young men had made. And the feedback, I mean, I've spoken to them already, to some of them already, the feedback that we had was fantastic, that it had reassured the families that their young men were doing something worthwhile with their time in custody and not just wasting it away, but also just in terms of our decency and respect agenda. And the feedback from our staff for that, our prison officer colleagues in Hyde Bank, has also been absolutely positive to a man and a woman.
I just wanted to add some detail to the restorative debate that we were having there. And just to give you an example, probation managed to get some funds from the assets recovery money, and we have now working with our community partners in 2 pilots with adult restorative practices, one in Newry and one in East Belfast and Ards area. And that'll be, for the first time again, working on the good practice from Youth Justice, really looking at innovation around adult conferencing, and they were really going to prioritise assaults against the elderly and interface violence, and we're going to do that again. That money is limited for a year, and again in terms of looking at doing something a bit different and in real terms. So again, happy to feed back on that through Brian in terms of informing the strategy as it develops.
Okay. Declan just wanted to add something.
Just a very, very brief word. I mean, for me, the restorative policy and the development of that is really, for me, reducing offending in operation and how successful it can be, because we do have it very successfully for young people on the ground. We're now rolling that out to young people in the woodland setting. But Brian and I agreed a few months ago that the learning should be drawn from our experiences, and we've consolidated our team to work closely together so that we can develop the policy drawn on the experience and the staff who were involved in that. So I think it works very well.
Wish you well. Thank you very much, Chair.
Edwin?
Yeah. With your permission, Chairman, I'd like to raise another issue, but at the end of the meeting with Ms McAllister, if that's possible. But in relation to this particular issue, I would welcome this strategy, because I think prisons are reform institutes as opposed to just locking people away for a while. And I would have always been critical of the amount of drugs, both prescribed and illegal drugs, that are in the prison, because the prisoners were quite heavily doped up and possibly not giving an awful lot of trouble, but it wasn't a reform institute in that respect. Strategies are well and good, but if they're left to gather dust, they're ineffective. What are we going to see on the ground? What's going to be different about the prison as a result of this strategy, and how are we going to really witness benefits of it?
I mean, what you said is music to my ears, because I fully concur that strategy, producing the strategy is not the job. That's just the way to deliver the job. So we are clear that this is about practical deliverables, and Brian mentioned the outcomes. We have decided that we will measure this on a small number of outcomes so that we can make it as simple as we can. So how will it be different? PRT recommendation 31, which was about us all working together, has been signed off. So how it looks different is we've got multi-agency teams, we've got a focus on the offender, and every prisoner now has a structured development plan. And how it will look different is that we will measure how many people are coming into the system, and we will be measuring the 12-month reoffending rate, so that we'll actually be able to demonstrate that what we're doing has an impact. Brian, do you want to?
Yep. First thing I would say in answer to the question is we're going to raise the awareness of all of our staff about what are the factors that really influence change in people. Raise their awareness and raise their skills. And we have certainly commenced that within the PRT programme, and we now have prisons, probation, psychology and other disciplines, the 30-odd other providers in prisons working as a collective against, as Sue has said, the prisoner development plan. So we now have professionals from all the organisations who have the same knowledge base, who are developing the same skills, and who have the ability to engage with offenders in the positive fashion this theory advocates. I think the evidence of that is in the delivery of PRT 29, 30 and 31, which evidences a joined-up approach with the prison service and probation, managing change in offenders through their prison, out to resettlement, and as Sammy says, back into the communities, and linking them into community groups whom we fund and engage with to help successfully resettle offenders. That's what I expect to see.
Do you want to say a bit about each of your areas, how it looks different?
Well, I mean, for me, I think the assistance has been what we've been doing for years, and I think how you're seeing things now is the success, I believe, of the assistance. But I think, as we pointed to the Minister's announcement a few weeks ago, there are other things we have to learn and continue to learn and work closely with colleagues. So I think that we will build on the work we've done thus far and try and take us to the next level over the next years, working closely.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it was Brian said earlier on about, and Declan said it again, in some ways Youth Justice Agency and probation, because of some of our skill set within the organisations, and in particular social work, has been working at this for many years now. So the resistance in many ways is become a new language in terms of what we've been doing. But that means it's very important now, because as Sue has said, what we're trying to do, which is different, is to work much more in a collaborative manner, so that the end result, that we're all pushing in the same direction or pulling in the same direction, to make sure that ultimately any individual, whether they go to court, whether they end up in prison, or whether they come out in community as a young person or an adult, actually ensures that they have the best of all the agency's efforts within the department to ensure that person will stop offending. So that would cost to that individual, in terms of human cost and social capital, can be as high as possible, but actually the reduced costs overall in locking people up, whenever we shouldn't need to do that.
I know the Prince's Trust, in conjunction with the Prison Service in England, have a scheme whereby a lot of utility companies and other large companies are coming in and going through a very rigorous interview process with prisoners and actually identifying people they believe to be suitable employees post-prison, and then there's a degree of preparation work carried out whilst the individuals are still in prison, and it has been hugely successful. Are we likely to see that type of activity where we're working closely with large companies here in Northern Ireland to ensure that it is almost seamless that someone leaves prison at the end of one week and the start of the following week is commencing employment?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. We've joined something called the Employers Forum for Reducing Reoffending, which brings together some large employers, and we're working with them. We're already working with some major employers in Northern Ireland for precisely that, because again we know that if somebody can be picked up at the gate and they can start work immediately, that increases their chance of staying free of offending.
We also hosted a large employer forum in November of last year, which was very well attended by the very, very large companies. We will continue to develop that work, but I think that points me to the fourth strand of our action plan, where we need also to do more work about educating the community, the media and employers about the appropriateness and value of finding work and employment for ex-offenders, maybe to reduce offending.
Okay, anyone else has raised any issues? So, thank you very much. Sorry, yes.
Ms McAllister, at the last meeting, I raised an issue with you, and I got a letter sometime after from Brian Milford, and read just a couple of paragraphs quickly. When the Director General of NI Prison Service, Sue McAllister, and a number of colleagues gave evidence for the Justice Committee on 4th March 2015, he raised the matter of the ending of security notices to non-prison grade staff. In response, Ms McAllister stated, Mark Adam and Paul Cockwell are in discussion with Brian Milford from NIPSA. Despite writing to Mrs McAllister on the 25th of February and 2nd of March 2015, neither she nor any of her colleagues have spoken to me, and that was 2 weeks after. They still hadn't any contact. Just say that, if he's right, then that is something that would be very damaging to your credibility for this committee.
No.
If he's wrong, I'm sure you will have a trail, in terms of identifying, setting up meetings and so forth for your secretariat.
He was right. I said to you that the meeting had already taken place. I was wrong. The meeting was planned and did subsequently take place, and I believe we wrote and apologised for that misinformation.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Thank you. Okay, members, just a note then, the progress report will be provided to the committee towards the end of the year. If we move on then to agenda item 5, and if the officials want to take their seats for the June monitoring round. Relevant papers, members, pages 40 through to 123. of your packs, Campbell, Glen Capper, Billy Irvine, Patrick Farr, to the committee. And again, whenever you're ready, if you want to brief us, then we'll open up to questions. So, in your own time.
Good afternoon, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to give you an update on the Department's finances. I plan to cover three separate areas in this briefing. Firstly, an update on our savings delivery plans for the budget 2011 to 15 period. Then our provisional outturn for the 2014-15 financial year. And finally, a summary of our in-year position following the June monitoring round. So looking firstly at savings delivery plans. This is the Department's final update on the savings delivery plans that were in place for the financial years 2011-12 to 2014-15. And following today's briefing, we will publish our savings information on the Department's internet site. As the committee will be aware, savings targets for each spending area were factored into budget allocations. That is, budgets for each of the core directorates under various agencies and arm's-length bodies were reduced by the savings amounts in each of the 4 years. The information provided has been prepared by each arm's-length body, and therefore it's their own, not the Department's interpretation of their progress against the savings plans. So as at the 31st of March, the Department achieved its overall target and delivered savings of £109.9 million against a target of £108.6 million. Where individual targets were not met, these have been compensated by higher savings in other areas. As you'll see from the updates, some areas have indicated that there's been an impact on frontline services, for example, the Policing Board, the Police Ombudsman's Office, the Probation Board and the PSNI. However, over the 4-year period, the Department sought to minimise the frontline impact as far as possible across its spending areas by providing additional funding where possible and by minimising budget cuts to frontline areas. In relation to this year, the committee recently reviewed the Department's final 2015-16 savings delivery plan, and again we will continue to work with all of the various bodies across the Department to look at ways to protect frontline services as much as possible. So turning then to last year's outturn, our provisional outturn for 2014-15 can be broken down into 3 areas of spend. In terms of our on-ring-fenced resource DEL budget, and that's effectively our cash resource budget of £1.1 billion, we underspent in total by 18.3 million, a variance of 1.7%. Excluding the PSNI, the underspend for the rest of the Department was 0.9% of budget. Annex B in your papers provides a breakdown by spending area and the reasons for the main variances. In relation to the PSNI, the paper notes the main reasons for the underspend, including the fact that last year was a volatile year for financial planning, with significant uncertainty over both in-year budget cuts and the 2015-16 budget. In response, PSNI implemented cost reduction plans with a focus on planning for the longer term. In addition, although sensible contingency measures were in place, the operating environment was reasonably stable, reducing financial pressures from, for example, responding to public disorder. And finally, a number of significant legal challenges were ongoing during the year, which proved inherently difficult to predict. For example, one case alone resulted in 22% of the police underspend. These underspends form part of the Executive's budget exchange scheme and are carried forward into 2015-16 to be allocated by the Executive. When setting budgets for the 2011 to 15 period, the Department informed the Committee that we have surplus ring-fenced resource DEL, that's our non-cash budget. That's a technical budget for costs such as depreciation and can't be used to fund other areas of spend. And last year we didn't use £8 million of this budget. Finally, provisional outturn shows a capital underspend of £4.9 million. The largest element of this relates to slippage in the prison service capital programme. Turning then to our in-year funding position, through its involvement in the 2015-16 budget process, the committee will be aware that this year is extremely challenging. Very difficult funding and prioritisation decisions have and will be required that will have a major impact on the wider justice system and the services we provide. So just to recap, in setting 2015 to 16 budgets, the starting point for all DOJ spending areas was a reduction of 15.1% from last year's opening baselines. An allocation of 70 million was provided by the Executive as part of the draft budget. And in some areas, this funding has been used to offset specific demand-led pressures. In other areas, it has been used to offset the impact of baseline cuts, and so some areas have cuts lower than 15.1%. Conversely, some areas have higher cuts, so that funding can be reallocated to frontline priorities. And a further allocation of £20 million was provided by the Executive as part of the final budget, and that was solely for PSNI purposes. So, having completed the June monitoring round internally, the pressures the Department intends to bid for are outlined in your paper. The most significant pressure relates to legal aid. After applying the 15.1% cut to the Legal Services Agency baseline, the available funding would have been 64 million, approximately 40 million short of the forecast legal aid requirement. Therefore, the Department had to increase the baseline by using some of the Executive allocation and deepening the scale of cuts elsewhere. However, even with an increased baseline in 15-16 and the work undertaken to make savings in this area, there remains a legal aid pressure. Based on the Legal Services Agency's most recent forecast, the Department will bid for £23.8 million for legal aid as part of June monitoring. Your paper provides details of some smaller bids and other adjustments that will form part of the Department's June monitoring position. In addition, we continue to work with relevant stakeholders to quantify our bid in relation to the Historical Investigation Unit that form part of the Stormont House Agreement funding package. However, as the committee will be aware, June monitoring is taking place in the context of ongoing financial issues facing the Executive. I'm not able to provide any further details about any potential impact on the DOJ, but the Department's accounting officer has taken the responsible step of asking all spending areas to now suspend any discretionary spend and only continue to fund inescapable or contractual commitments. Where there is a significant impact on the justice system or public safety, the Department and Justice Minister will consider this before agreeing the next steps. And we'll continue to keep the committee informed as the in-year position develops. So I hope that provides you with an overview of our financial position, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Okay, there's a number of members have indicated, so I'll be fairly brief on this. In terms of the legal aid issue, obviously there's the Bar Council and Law Society have indicated they're going to take legal action against the Department. If they were successful and the Minister wasn't able to make the reductions he's planned, what areas of spend are going to be reduced in further? I mean, what areas that you're currently funding will you not be able to fund in?
Assuming our June monitoring bid wasn't successful and we didn't get that extra money into our baseline, I think it's fair to say from the scrutiny the committee gave of our 2015-16 budget process, you have a good understanding and they're outlined in our savings delivery plan of the actions we've already had to take to live within the 15-16 budget, and that includes an impact on the court system, probation board, prison service, the police and so on. So whilst I wouldn't be able to give specific details at this stage until we go through the process if we had to, it would effectively be more impact on those frontline areas.
And just in terms of the police budget, I mean, I asked you previously about the police budget and whether there was enough information sharing or work that they do in conjunction with the Department in terms of their financial management. I mean, the public would rightly, I suppose, look at the fact that the Chief Constable complained about not having enough finances and under pressure, and yet see him returning 14.9 million and ask, well, how do the two things line up? You're saying it's unforeseen circumstances and things like that. The exchange scheme then, so that money then is returned, that's guaranteed to go back to the PSNI in the following year, is that right?
A couple of points, Chair. I think in my opening remarks I provided some of the context to the police underspend. I think there's some important points in there. In relation to what happens to that underspend, that underspend goes into the blocks. It used to be called end-year flexibility budget exchange pot. So together with the underspends from other departments, that funding goes into a central pot, and the allocation of that is then decided on by the Executive. So the underspends don't follow the specific areas into the next year. They go into a central pot to be reallocated based on Executive priorities.
Okay, and just finally, there's a in the grand scheme of things, a relatively small amount of money for cybercrime. The PSNI have put a bit in. That's, I suppose, they're saying that as a borne-out consequence of money that's been given in GB that then goes on to the block grant, and they're looking for that. What exactly are they looking to use that for? Given that I would have thought that cybercrime issues will mainly be dealt with at sort of NCA level or national level, I can understand how there'd be educational requirement for educational stuff at a local level. So what exactly are the PSNI looking to do with that 1.5 million?
I think I'm going to have to come back to you on that, Chair. We will have received from the police a specific detail.
That's right.
You're right, there will be a local element to that, and that's effectively what police are bidding for. But if you're content, I'll come back with some details on that.
That's it.
Yep, thanks very much, Chair. The last day we were here, we asked for basically, well, I asked for a couple of things. What's the present position in terms of allocations of funding for the Desert Crate project? And the second thing is, we had asked for and had sought some sort of clarification around the 30 millions that had been promised by the Westminster government. Now, at that stage, I think maybe it had been raised 2 or 3 times. And the position we always got didn't seem to move from that was that it was subject to talks between DOJ and DFP. So what's the contemporary position around that 30 millions? Has it been lost or reallocated, or is it still there?
If I go back to the 2015-16 budget setting process, and at that stage there was intended to be 53 odd million pounds to be carried forward under EYF for the college. Given where the status of the college currently is, the discussions were between DFP and Treasury, and the Department's understanding is that Treasury's stance is that EYF won't be available.
Sorry, will or?
Will not be available. So on that basis, depending on what the outcome is of the current work on the project, there's the potential that the funding would have to solely come from within the blocks allocation.
So is it, that's 53 million now gone?
The current position...
Sorry, I should say that 53 million that was available is no longer available in its entirety from that source.
That's the position.
Oh, right. Okay, Chair, I think that's pretty disappointing that has slipped now too. So, okay, Chair, that's all I needed. Okay, thank you.
Sammy?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation so far. Glenn, in the Together Building a United Community, you're talking here about a bid to include of 0.8 million for resource and 0.1 million for capital. And could you give us a breakdown, and that's in relation to peace walls?
It is. And in some ways, we've classed that as a bid. It's more a transfer of funding between departments. The way OF and DFM hold a central pot for Together Building a United Community. Each department then bids for its share of that pot. So the department will hopefully, as part of this process, receive a transfer from OFM DFM for that amount of funding. As you say, it's 0.8 million resource, 0.1 million capital, and again, if I come back with the details of that, in terms of how the 0.8 is going to be spent, presumably you're after which area and so on.
Well, just the nature of it, I've been involved with the DOJ at the interface, and they've been, to be honest, they've been very helpful and supportive. But things like replacing roofs and reinforced glass and people's houses, that costs big money. I'm just thinking, that the 0.1 million in capital wouldn't get you very much money if you want to replace, 10 houses, 10 roofs of 10 houses, as an example.
Okay. If you're content again, I'll come back with a detailed breakdown of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Raymond?
Thank you very much, Chair. Just in terms of some of the underspends, the PSNI 14.9 million, that's right. In relation to what happens to that in terms of where does that money go?
Same principle as I outlined to the Chair. That forms part of the department's overall underspend. That then is added up essentially with the underspends of other departments, goes into that concept of the budget exchange scheme, which is then rolled forward up to a ceiling and that is then allocated by the executive this year.
So in terms of the underspend in the compensation services, how is that calculation made at the beginning of the year?
In terms of the
There's
budget,
4.4 million of an underspend.
that's correct, yeah.
Yeah. There's no flexibility to move that within the department?
There would have been last year at the various monitoring rounds. Once last year closes, that underspend gets added up to the other ones and forms a total amount that gets carried forward.
And would there be any sort of contingency now for next year to try and do that earlier rather than have they hand it back?
I think if we look at the context of last year, the department's budget fluctuated significantly with cuts and extra funding coming on. I think that was one of the main drivers that made it difficult to do accurate financial planning, or as accurate as we would have liked it to have been. But yes, we have an ongoing process of looking at and monitoring budgets, June monitoring being one of those processes. And yes, ideally we will reallocate funding within the DFP processes as quickly as we can.
Okay, and just the Prison Service had an underspend of 1.6 million for approved projects. Will they now go ahead in the next round, or have they to be resubmitted?
The Prison Service capital budget for this year is about £10 million or so, I think. So within that, yes, there will be some.
They'll be able to go ahead with the projects. And in terms of the PSNI, see there's an underspend of, I just don't understand this, 1.3 million. This relates to additional receipts of 1.5 million from the sale of Hull Top sites. How does that work?
What we're saying there is the police overall in capital terms underspent by £500,000 if you set aside the Community Safety College, and the police would rightly say that was a good outcome. But what we're saying is that what contributed to that £500,000 was the fact that police got receipts in from sales, and that effectively increased their capital budget, so that produced helped reduce some of the underspend.
Okay, thank you very much.
Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I think we all would have certain sympathies with regards to the unregulated year you've had, with regards to the ups and downs and the uncertainty at times. And of course, we're facing very much financial cliff if parties maintain their irresponsible stance. And I don't think anyone, not ourselves or yourselves, can get us out of that. That's more for the parties who are being irresponsible. But with regards to this, when it comes to January monitoring round, I always feel that, well, we're nearly finished the year, 3 months to go, or 2 months to go. Surely the money that is underspent can be used, and you can use the January monitoring round to really focus that better and to try and glean as much of that up and hoover as much of that up as possible in other ways. Now again, looking over the year, many of the fights that I've had, campaigns that I've had, relate to the drug addiction service in Railway Street, who are still under considerable pressure financially. We also have all the mountain rescue groups that are crying out for money, and although there have been funding produced, they could always do with more. And even because the Drug Addiction Centre and the mountain rescue organisations, and many of them, and Loughney Rescue also, Mourne Mountains and Northwest, they also help the PSNI. So not only the core department, but also PSNI. Is there not a more inventive way come January, and when people should know exactly how much money they will need and how much they're going to return, is there no other inventive way, and it alludes back to Rim McCartney's question, that they can shift or move, swap that money around? The mountain rescue people need their vans or trucks serviced, and even if they could be pushed into a conveyor belt whereby police vehicles are being serviced at the same time, practical things like that still take up money. Surely there's other ways that we can channel that money and help these groups that are vulnerable in their own nature because of their voluntary status, but because they do so much to keep costs down for both PSNI in an operational sense and financial sense, and of course then DOJ in the work that they do in the preventative spend. So is there no other way of being imaginative when it comes to moving money about?
I accept your point about January monitoring. Just to touch briefly on the timing of January monitoring, it's called January monitoring because the department's return goes into DFP at the very start of January. Yes. But therefore, the department has to work back to that deadline. So we effectively start January monitoring in October, November time, to allow the process to go through the departmental board and then through the committee and then to DFP. So at best, you're making decisions for the January monitoring round based on the department's outturn at November, at best, which is just over 6 months into the financial year. But having set the scene, I do accept your point. To give a couple of examples about how we have been as creative as possible, and to pick up on the example of Railway Street, the department, for example, in February and March of last year, was able to find £82,000, I think, for Railway Street from the Assets Recovery Scheme. So I think that's an example of how, within that context, we are able to do that. I think it's also worth noting that in relation to the search and rescue funding, that the department has, I think it's correct to say, doubled that funding from what it was last year. 46,000 over 90,000. So yes, there are some things we can do, and we will continually seek to do that.
I take your point, and certainly the complication in the system, and I didn't realise that you had to start so soon to get to January. But that money for Railway Street, no, sorry, the money from Railway Street came from asset recovery. So that was another stream, if you like. So that wasn't core finance. Also, for the mountain rescue money, search and rescue money, that came, most of that came from decal, did it not, in a previous
I think
year?
the baseline potentially did, but the department was able to increase the funding.
Yes. So my question is there any way that core department, because the core department won't have that big a budget, I would imagine. PSNI and Legal Aid will be the big players, but still 4.4 million seems to be a lot of money for a smaller financial pot. So is there any way that the core department can distribute that money more effectively?
I think the simple answer is yes, and we will continue to try and find ways to do that. Again, context is important. An awful lot of that core department underspend related to the timing of payments within compensation services, the former compensation agency. So you could literally have some very big high-value cases worth hundreds of thousands of pounds, either settling for less than was forecast, or else, depending on the timing of court sittings, slipping from one financial year into the next. But that's not an excuse yet. We will continue to seek ways to use that funding in the best possible way.
And last theme, Chair, legal aid payments, and we talk about pressure on legal aid. But is it not my understanding that, is it not the case that that's, if you like, a delayed rolling payment? And if that is a delayed rolling payment, it can be paid in instalments, in smaller chunks even. Is that not the case?
I would have to defer to colleagues from the particular business area. I know there is the concept of hardship payments, for example, but I think effectively the focus is on assessing the bill. I think where the department is trying to move to, in terms of there was the concept of very high cost cases in the past that were effectively taxed. The department's trying to move to standard fees and has done that in criminal. And I think that makes the process simpler and hopefully more value for money.
If a solicitor, I'm sure barrister, can wait years before they put in a bill, surely the department can wait a period of time before they honour that bill. And if we can pay it in smaller chunks, surely it's better to spend that money on a greater pressure than is the case on legal aid?
I think that there are a significant number of different categories of payments within legal aid, and each has its own subtleties and nuances in terms of life cycles and so on. So the overall legal aid forecast and therefore pressure is a function of all those things. I'm not entirely sure what the position would be in relation to what you've outlined, other than to say that yes, there are significant lead times in some of the categories of cases. Others are much quicker, but in terms of calculating the forecast and the pressure, it's trying to combine all of those things. Worth noting that although the forecast pressure is £23 odd million in June monitoring this year, that is a smaller pressure than it was last year for a couple of reasons. A, the overall forecast is down, and B, the starting point is higher because, as I said in my opening comments, the department has sought to increase the legal aid baseline as far as possible from within the funding allocated to it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Chris?
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks. It really comes on the back of what Paul has said and Graham also about this use of underspend. And perhaps I'll touch on the Ombudsman. You know, I met with a number of families this morning who in recent months have been told that, you know, investigations into like loved ones murders, for example, there won't be the same amount of evidence collected because the funds are simply not there. Timeliness and the quality of the investigations have been severely affected by the fact that the Ombudsman's Office has been asked to make savings of less than 400,000 this year, which they've met. But yet here we have, and families are quite aware of this now, an underspend within PSNI budgets of £14 million. I'm sure you can understand the severe frustration that those families are feeling. Is there no way that this money can, you know, come over? I know, you know, obviously now, but, you know, in advance, as Paul's talked about earlier stage around January, is there no way that this money can be? Is this legal frameworks that avoids this? How can this be done going forward, that we don't are in this same situation next year as well?
Again, I think just to start off saying context is important. Police underspend is in the context of a budget of over £700 million, and I've talked about the timing of legal cases and so on very late, and in fact into the last couple of weeks of March. The process for underspends isn't within the gift of the department. It's at executive level. So those underspends, as I said, go into a central pot to be reallocated according to the executive's priorities. It's also worth noting, of course, that the department, as I said in my opening remarks, continues to work with relevant stakeholders in relation to the funding package under the Stormont House Agreement for the Historical Investigations Unit. So that's a separate stream of funding that I think relates to the issues you're talking about. So we continue to pursue that option for funding as well.
Okay, Alban?
Thanks very much. Just in relation to asset recovery, given the full implementation of the NCA here and the perfection, as it were, of the asset recovery mechanism, would you anticipate a higher level of recovery and therefore an additional stream in relation to assisting the sort of programmes that were originally envisaged to be assisted?
It's very difficult to predict what the funding stream from that source looks like. It has fluctuated over the number of years in which the scheme has operated. It's roughly in a band of sort of £1 to £3 million or so. But the fact that it is lumpy in terms of the annual amount makes it difficult to plan for how that funding is used. So, for example, if funding is received from a particular case very late in the financial year, given we've just talked about the fact that underspends can't be carried forward, there's a drive to spend that funding very late in the year, and it makes it difficult to plan. What we are doing is working with the Department of Finance and Personnel to see if there's some way that we can smooth that over a period of X years, so that we know we will have X million pounds to spend in a year, so that at the start of the year we can plan to use that in absolutely the most effective way that we can. Whether or not more funding comes in, difficult to predict, and there may be a time lag there, but regardless of that, we're seeking to smooth the funding as much as possible to make sure that what does come in is used as effectively as possible.
So are you suggesting that it might be possible to save some of the money or some mechanism with the Department of Finance?
Well, we're exploring options. It might be possible, for example, if we got £2 million in 1 year and we're forecasting £3 million the next year, to strike a position with DFP that we say, let's plan to use £2.5 million in each of the years.
Yes.
And if we know that at the start of each year, we can spend it more effectively.
Yeah. Was there an underspend last year, the preceding financial year?
I think in 14-15, I think we spent virtually all of the funding that came in under that scheme, albeit that some came in very late in the financial year, and it was more difficult to spend than we would otherwise have wanted. But to the best of my knowledge, we spent up to the capacity on that scheme.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Chair.
Surprised you didn't take bait from Paul about the not paying barristers for Stuart?
I'll leave that to the Bar Council.
Thank you, Chair. Just perhaps finally, the early retirement scheme, have you an assessment now? I believe it's come to, the applications are all in, and there should be an indication of the numbers, both applying and successful, and whether you've met the targets in relation to that.
I think factored into the Department's 15-16 plans across the core and agencies were 195 people, I think, to leave under the scheme. We won't know the figure for a couple of months. As the committee may be aware, some letters issued at the start of this week to staff, but there's now a period where staff have a time to make a decision on whether or not they wish to leave. So until we know what that looks like, it's going to be difficult to know how we plan financially for that. Don't have the exact number, but there were less than 195, so we will have an issue to work through after this monitoring round.
And is there the resources there to pay for this, is it?
The resources don't reside within the department. The resources form part of the Stormont House agreement, and I don't have the exact wording in the letters, but I understand that the offers are conditional on the funding being available.
Okay, so they are actually currently held up.
The letters have gone out to appropriate staff, asking them to make a decision within a certain time period once figures are received, but the letters note that those offers are conditional on funding being made available.
And even if the member of staff makes a decision to accept, it's effectively a fantasy package as of today, because there's no money to pay.
I would want to defer to personnel colleagues for the nuances, but the letters have gone out with a conditional offer.
Okay, thank you.
Just before we finish then, you haven't mentioned the fine default issue. The department's highlighted the potential for very significant pressures depending on the outcome of the test cases. What does very significant mean?
I think it would be, given this is an ongoing legal case, it's probably inappropriate of me to try and put a figure on that. Also because it would be hugely difficult to do, because there's a number of range of options and a range of people involved. I think what I can say is that at an extreme, the figure would be sufficiently big that the department couldn't afford it within its existing resources, and we would have to seek funding from the executive.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, are we content, or are there any comments anybody wants to make, or to the department? Yeah.
Just on that community safety project, further disappointing news to hear what we just heard there. I know others and myself have been yapping away about that money for a good while now, and it's just completely lost. Big blow to us all, big blow to the construction sector. Really, I don't know what or if we're going to get an update on this. Well, the project's never moving, but to see what the latest concoction that they've come up with about the project. So if the project's dead, that's here it's dead. rather than this procrastination and, if you like, death by 1,000 cuts. And expectations have been dashed so much locally, I know that you wonder just why do they even bother doing this sort of stuff. So would it be helpful, Chair, I know it would to me, if we could have a briefing on where the project is at some stage? I know it's back and forward to the executive and options here and there, but really to get a bit of clarity around this. I know you weren't here previously whenever all this was going on, but anybody who was here in the committee, it's incredible. The effort and energy that has been expended in this and the sheer incompetence that has flagged up along the way too. It's incredible. Edwin, you were minister too, and you saw some. Yeah. It's unbelievable.
Okay. Ill-conceived.
Pardon?
It was ill-conceived. I'd said.
Okay. Yeah, and I would echo what Pat and Edwin has said, but also spare a thought for the local contractors who are caught up in all of this, and you stand to lose thousands in a tendering process that led to nowhere.
That's right.
And someone was actually awarded the contract, which now is no more. So it put a lot of firms, local firms, in jeopardy.
Expectations built up to be dashed again, you know.
No, look, we'll certainly write the department and get an update on that then. Okay, then move on to agenda item 6, Psychoactive Substances Bill. Can I refer you to pages 125 and 126 of the folder? The department's written to us regarding the announcement of the government in the Queen's speech to introduce Psychoactive Substances Bill. The draft bill will define a psychoactive substance, and the intention of the legislation is to prohibit and disrupt the manufacture, distribution, sale and supply of these substances, particularly those not covered under the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971. It will also enable prohibition notices and orders, civil offences, to be issued by police officers and local authority officers. The department is indicated under paragraph 9(1)(f) of Schedule 3 to the Northern Ireland Act 1998. The proposed Psychoactive Substances Bill is a reserved matter, and legal advice has indicated that a legislative consent motion is not required by the Assembly for these proposals. The timeline is not yet clear, however, early indications suggest the various stages of the bill are due to be completed by December 2015. So it's really just to note, I know it's an issue in East Antrim, certainly in the Larne area there's a lot of concern about it. Quite sure it's the same in other members' constituencies as well. So if members are agreed, we'll just get regular updates on how that bill is proceeding. I think it's something we'd all welcome if the legislation is competent and is able to actually tackle the issue, because I think it can be incredibly complicated.
Chair, we could ask Tom.
Indeed, yes.
Our man is in Havana.
Very good.
I'm sure you'll be kept up to date, Chair.
Very good.
Yes. Yeah. Very good.
Okay. Agenda item 7 then. Refer members to pages 128 through 171. The committee wrote to the department in June 2013 to outline its key EU priority issues relevant to justice and home affairs, and requested regular updates of these issues from the Department of Justice, including specific information on the likely implications or impact for Northern Ireland of each proposal, also to enable it to monitor developments. The committee subsequently agreed its EU priorities for 2015, which remain substantially the same. The department has now provided the committee with the summer 2015 EU Justice and Home Affairs biannual report, which summarises the current position in relation to EU matters being dealt with by the department, the known impact for Northern Ireland, and the next steps to be taken. The department has advised that the status of certain measures may not have changed since the last report in 2014, so that's just really for noting. Agenda item 8 then is criminal records disclosure. Refer you to pages 173 through 212. Just to remind the committee, an amendment tabled by the Minister to the Justice Bill to provide for a review mechanism as part of the statutory filtering system introduced by Access NI on the 14th of April was agreed by the Assembly on Tuesday. The detail of the operation of the criminal records filtering review mechanism will be set out in guidance, and the Department has now provided a copy of the draft guidance on which it intends to carry out a public consultation and a copy of the consultation document. The draft guidance is designed to provide information to a range of audiences and sets out the context, purpose and scope of the review mechanism and outlines the processes involved. It also explains the role of the independent reviewer and the various factors likely to be taken into account of her consideration of an applicant's case. So, Patsy, yeah.
Chair, just on this one, it's great to hear the theory, but the practice is that many people are still waiting for clearance through this mechanism. So it may be helpful at some stage, I don't know how we get a written update as to how they're performing or if they've improved their performance any, particularly the police clearances. That's a huge difficulty, and it's actually preventing people taking up jobs. Yeah. So
We have that in the correspondence. I'm not sure it makes, I'm not sure it makes particularly good news, but we'll certainly deal with it when we come to the correspondence.
All right, I missed that.
That's okay. And we shall seamlessly then move on to correspondence, which is agenda item 9. There's 7 items of correspondence, pages 214 onwards. There's a couple I want to mention. Just item 2 is an update from the department in relation to outstanding access NI checks for taxi licence applications and overall performance. The information indicates that the total number of outstanding applications for enhanced check in respect of taxi licences has increased in the last month from 166 up to 187. This is due to delays in PSNI returning applications, and the minimum time for a check to be returned has increased from 26 days to 30 days. Although Access NI has noted an improvement in this turnaround time lately. The number of applications where the individual has been waiting in excess of 60 days has decreased from 44 to 35. PSNI have approvals in place for increased resources, and this should assist once staff are fully trained. And Sammy and Patsy both taken interest in this.
Go ahead, Patsy.
Chair, this is just about people who have applied for taxi licences.
Yeah.
I'd say if we got the updated further figures.
It does talk about their overall performance, not just specifically about.
I thought this was just for taxi licences.
Looks like it.
If you turn over the page, if you keep going past it, just the correspondence.
Page 220. 220 in terms of overall performance. Continues.
But it doesn't quantify them. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
The other way it gives the numbers on this about taxi licences.
Yeah, no, that's
but it's not quantifying the overall figures, because this, I know people have been in touch with me, they're not taxi drivers, but people looking to work in nursing homes and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, we'll go back and try to get some more detail. Okay. Sammy, do you?
Yeah. I was just going to say, they're doing this on a monthly basis, Chair, isn't that right? Yes. So, Ron, just give us, an update. They can include the wider information on a monthly basis.
Sure, no, that's fine.
Cover both.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Chair, can we ask what they're actually doing to try and speed it up?
Well, that's
more to the point, I think.
Chair, on this is just one aspect or example of how the cogs turn very slowly in government. But something like this, which is a front-face part of a service of government, needs to be more agile. Because this is people's livelihoods here, and it's preventing them from actually earning a day's pay. It's an absolute disgrace that government can't be more agile and flexible and quicken up and slow down as the need arise. And it's diabolical that we can leave people hanging like this for so long.
Should we get them up, whoever it is? Or is that a policing board matter?
It's a PSNI, so you could argue it's a policing board matter, but given that it's an impact on let's try to we'll find out just in terms of the remit and what have you. But it's a policing issue. They have looked to get out more resources into this to try to improve the system.
Because it is a bad situation.
Great deal.
Chair, is there any way we could find out the type of hold-up? Because there are some people who get their licence renewed and there are no complications.
Yeah.
And there are people who there shouldn't be any complications, yet there are. I understand that there may be a problem. Someone has maybe a criminal offence or whatever, or some sort of offence in the past, and you can understand it. But these are people going from year to year, whatever it is, and they're been held up for no apparent reason.
Look, let's request a meeting or a briefing from Access NI, and if the PSNI want to accompany them to that, that might be very helpful for us.
Because
and that would allow us to get around.
The PSNI one is a real difficulty.
Yeah.
You have the application to Access NI, and if they refer it over to the police, then that's when it can double at least the time.
Yeah, we'll do that then.
Thank
you.
Chair, it was much the same as Pat said. The hold-up appears to be at the police side. Even the police are accepting that themselves. I would really like to get an explanation, because surely in today's society where all the information is held on a computerised database, surely there shouldn't be any applications with them more than 60. Why should they be there 60 days? I can't understand it. I can't get into my head why, and I'd really like an explanation.
Yeah, look, we'll try to get both of them up together. I think that will probably be the best way in which we deal with it. Item 3, page 222, reoffending analysis for a sample of offenders who completed an ACRO job track programme during 2010-11. The analysis, which aims to assess the impact of job track programme and reoffending, indicates even partially completing the job track programme did reduce the one-year reoffending rate by between 2 and 18 percentage points, which is just a statistically significant difference. Some relevance, I suppose, to the discussion we had earlier on. Given the success of the programme, the fact that NACRO funding has been reduced, it may be something that committee members feel appropriate that we write to the Department of Justice and the Department of Learning, Employment and Learning, because they part fund that programme from NACRO, just to see what efforts have been made to secure funding for this programme to continue, and maybe even expand that programme, given that it has been pretty successful. We're happy enough that we do that. Okay. Item 5 then, page 232, is an invitation from the Human Rights Commission to its inaugural Social Justice Lecture on Tuesday the 9th of June in the Royal Courts of Justice. So if anybody wishes to go to that, just let the committee staff know. Depending on what's happening in here, I would try to get along to it, but if anybody else wants to go along, just let the committee staff know. Any other issues with correspondence, or are we happy enough to move on? Item 10. Chairman's business. I have no items of business to report. Any other business? Any members of any other business to raise?
Sure, I was just going to ask about, I can't remember if I mentioned this before, but the Belfast Law Centre, I think we had some dealings with them, and they actually invited us out. I was speaking to them recently and said maybe in the future we could maybe consider a visit, having a meeting on their premises.
Okay, I think we have it on our list of many invitations. We're very popular at the moment, so we'll try to schedule as many of them as we can in the next number of months. Okay, members, then, next meeting on the 11th of June, 2 p.m, room 30. Okay, thank you.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29.